Family disputes can make us feel isolated and vulnerable. Maybe you're going through a divorce or a legal dispute about your kids. Perhaps you've spent hours on Google or have even posted anonymously on Facebook to see what others have to say. But are you getting the actual information and support that you're looking for? Our podcast, Legal Lounge, aims to dispel misinformation and downright bad legal information to empower anyone with questions about their family, their children, their finances, their marriage, and the law. As a team focused exclusively on family law matters, we aim to help listeners not only with the information they need, but also with the hope that their situation has a solution. Short disclaimer, please note this podcast is for educational purposes only, and the information should not be relied upon as legal advice or for legal purposes. And welcome back to Legal Lounge. We're excited to have a guest, actually from afar, but a good friend of mine. Her name is Cherie. And Cherie, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Hi, Theresa. Thank you for having me. It's always my pleasure to see you and to talk to you. I am originally a lawyer by long practice and early training that shifted about 10 years ago to full-time divorce coaching. I had gone through my own high conflict divorce and realized at that time, you hear more about coaching now, there weren't really people like me who had an expertise. In particular, I think a background in law certainly helps, but also a space to hold and guide people when they have difficulties in things like co-parenting or making decisions in divorce. So I did some certification in parent coordination and divorce coaching. And more than 10 years later, I have a thriving practice in this space. And I work with individuals, and I love working with couples who are contemplating in the midst of or post-divorce who have challenges.
Well, that's fantastic. I guess I'll add, though, you're a recovering lawyer because you got out of practice, right?
I did. And, you know, the one thing I think you can appreciate as a lawyer, and a really good one, is that you can solve people's legal problems and they're still unhappy. And I say that because I think the space for coaching allows us to understand what the law can do and what it can't do, and how, especially in a life transition like divorce, we may be able to find peace and joy on the other side of it. But it's things that we have to do, not the expectation that the law can fix it for us.
I could not have said it better myself. I really couldn't, because I think there is this misconception that people believe either the judicial system will change the other parent or opposing party, that an order will be exactly what one party wants it to be, and not realize that if they do take a case to a courtroom, it's actually a judge, a stranger, making these very critical life choices for a couple, for their finances, and for their children.
Well said. Yes.
Yeah. So I hope the listener hears us when we say, hey, there are other resources. And if you want to maintain control and have influence over your family situation, definitely think about a divorce coach or working with a family law attorney that is not just, let's file everything and throw the mud at the wall kind of situation. So switching gears to our topic of today, which is co-parenting. So I'm sure you have both personally and professionally a ton of tips and best practices for co-parenting. So tell us a little bit more about those co-parenting tips.
So I think what I'd like to start with, Theresa, with your permission, is the overarching theme of co-parenting, right? We do co-parenting even in a family home when we're married, right? People are making decisions, and sometimes one person is leading those decisions. Sometimes it's done more cooperatively, collaboratively, shall we say. But in divorce, I think sometimes, even if you've been the primary parent to make decisions, there might be an expectation that if you did it in the marriage, that you will lead outside of it. And unfortunately, not only can that not be true, because in general you have two homes and times when the kids just won't be with you, but often the spouse that was either left or decided to leave wants more empowerment in an area, right? So they will want to be making decisions. So I think it's important to know that even anytime we have a child and we have another person, partner, spouse involved, we're co-parenting. But in divorce, it becomes a new challenge because we may have someone who's no longer you assume it, your intimate partner, but more like a difficult business colleague. And now you have to make decisions for your child or children to cooperatively. So I think one of the first things I like to lead with is it's not all up to you. Letting go of what you can't control is an incredibly radically acceptance part of this process, and it's really hard, but we're gonna talk about how to do that together.
Yeah, I love that because you know, there comes a certain rhythm if two parents are still living together, and certain,
Yes.
you know, someone will, you know, just take the lead on laundry. The other person may take the lead on taking the child to soccer practice or dance. But suddenly you have these situations where you don't have that quote unquote household partner helping you with parenting. And so, oh no, one parent has to take the child to dance on their week, and then the other parent has to take the child to dance on their week. And so there's this reshuffling of responsibilities that can add stress to an already stressful situation. And we haven't even talked about, you know, the implications of separate households for a child.
And let's lead there because we are child-centric here, I'd say, Theresa. So doing that, I think it's really important to note that there's a lot of data now on what hurts a child in divorce, and it's not the divorce itself. Primary, certainly home with two parents functioning well together is, of course, a first choice. Short of that, it's not having a high conflict household. Obviously, we could do a much deeper dive into things like domestic violence, but that's not what we're talking about necessarily here today. In general, if you have a high conflict household and can separate and divorce and do better apart than together, the kids can thrive. So our goal is to have low conflict. And that applies to how you make decisions with regard to the kids' activities. Do you refuse to take them to dance on your week? Well, that impacts the child, right? So if our goal is really to stay child-centric, that you love your child more than you hate your co-parent, please notice that's really important to do, then you will work cooperatively, even if it's really hard at first to do that. And then just like co-parenting in a married or together household, you will get in a rhythm of it and it becomes easier. That I can promise you. But leaning into the resistance of the decision making mostly hurts the child, and we want to avoid that at all costs.
Yeah, that's critical because unfortunately the child becomes the unintended pawn or mechanism by which one parent is trying to hurt or control the other parent. When at the end of the day, look, if you want to fight, you know, and do like a bar brawl out back, then that's fine. Leave the kid out of it. Like, just leave the kid out of it is my request. Go one step further. And the only reason I say dance so prevalently is I was a dance teacher for so long. And I personally did witness custody disputes because I taught children in, you know, elementary and middle school years. And I remember seeing at least one child where they would only come to dance practice every other week because actually it was the father, go figure, but only the father wanted to bring the child to dance. And it was such a great activity for the little girl. She was also actually really good too at dance, but it just tore up my heart. And I tried my best to like catch her up on the off weeks, but unfortunately there's always going to be that lag behind because a child is missing half of the practices, especially if there's a performance on the horizon.
Well, that is such a good concrete example. And I love those examples for people who may be listening, because I think when we get very specific, we can think about how that actually impacts the child. And we're not just focused on, I'm right about this, whatever right means, right? Maybe one child got signed up for an activity without the consent of the other co-parent. But assuming you can make it work in your life for your child, my recommendation is to do it. It's better to be in the space of making your child happy, taking care of yourself, than being right and unhappy, which many people, as you will not be surprised to hear, take in divorce, right?
Yeah.
And being right is such a lonely place to be for you, for your children, and figuring out how you lean into compromise, which honestly, that's what co-parenting is. And it's a really hard skill, especially, I would say, Theresa, in today's world, we have such extreme positions about everything, right? And no one can simply say, hey, maybe I can lean into a little of what you want so I can get a little of what I want. And that really serves our children. So That's always my goal when I work with people. I notice too, Theresa, people make a lot of assumptions, which is why I love working with the co-parenting couples, because they'll say, well, you only want to take my child to dance because you were a prima ballerina and you have the expectation she will be too. And then you have a chance as a parent to say, oh, not at all. It's because it's half a mile down the street. It's convenient to both of us and it's a good physical activity. So giving each co-parent the chance to express their motivations, their intentions, sometimes their misunderstood assumptions, helps us manage that conflict. Otherwise, it'll either go unsaid or unstated or permission not given. And again, it's the children that are hurt.
Yeah. So what do you do with a parent that is just frustrating the process or not willing to engage in these conversations?
A great question. First of all, there's nothing I can do if they just won't show up. But I do try to, I was going to use the word lure, but that's not quite correct. I try to invite them warmly in, because sometimes this is the parent who hasn't felt heard. They feel misunderstood. So they present as really difficult and unpleasant, and maybe they are. But oftentimes, by giving them an hour of my time to tell their side of the story, what's been going on for you? What's been going on from your perspective with your child or children? And hearing them and saying, look, I can hold that for you in our conversations together. So I have heard from your former or spouse, and we talk to them. We're going to have what I call an agenda for success meeting. So oftentimes it's enough to hold and hear someone's story and then engage in a process where both parents are in the conversation, but they know they have someone who's going to let them be heard, allow them to speak, understands their perspective, and won't shame them in front of their co-parent.
That's huge. I think, especially if your voice hasn't been heard for so long, or even if you have spoken up, but it's just been ignored, it's understandable that someone is disheartened to try to speak up again or engage at all.
Exactly.
And it turns into a situation where some of our judges here in Charlotte have called it, instead of co-parenting, parallel parenting, which is kind of the fallback position that some courts have to follow, because again, the courts can't change the other side or the other parent. But that's the last ditch effort. The best effort would be if we can apply ourselves to a healthy co-parenting situation.
Yes, and I don't want to entirely discount, Theresa. I'm really glad you mentioned parallel parenting. There are some parents I meet with where perhaps they can lean into co-parenting on some issues, but can parallel parent on others. And we know best practice for the children is co-parenting, but not far behind is parallel parenting when required, as long as there's no disparagement of the co-parent or the child in that process. So I take what I can get. We create shifts in the biggest number of categories we can. And then there is some radical acceptance that maybe they will not align on some issues and things will be different, because we talked briefly about the fact that there are two households. So if your, former spouse will definitely not feed organic broccoli, we're going to let that go. There are just some things that we have to, and is it important? Sure it is. We want healthy fruits and vegetables and diet, but we cannot also control all the details of that household. So to some extent, I help the client who's leaning into, I know what's best for this child, and maybe they're right, let go of what they cannot control. And sometimes that allows the parent that hasn't felt good enough or validated because they're always being told that they're wrong, the ability to lean in a little more and express what they know to be true for their child too.
It's funny you say broccoli, because my brother has a huge aversion, not so much broccoli, but cauliflower, which I would say they're in a similar class of vegetables.
Yes.
And it's funny because it could be just that, oh, well, we're just not going to eat those certain vegetables because someone doesn't like it. And it's like, to your point, you can just radically accept it and let it be.
Let it be. And by the way, if that child will eat it at your house, I'm sure you'll serve it more than most kids in America have it. So
amen to that, actually. Yeah, I agree with you. Building relationships is a natural part of life. But how does the law affect those relationships? Do you want to marry your significant other, but have cold feet from the many divorce horror stories out there? Are you preparing for a custody battle against your ex? That is where modern legal comes in. We offer education and knowledge about the law when it affects the relationships near and dear to your heart. To learn more about how family law affects your family, book a consultation with an attorney of our Modern Legal team by visiting our website, emailing us, or calling us at 704-286-6302. Check out the information about Modern Legal Services at modernlegalnc.com. And go one step further, I'll add one additional kind of caveat here. Study after study shows that having both parents involved in a child's life is needed, is optimal. And again, child abuse, domestic violence, that's a separate issue, a separate podcast episode, if you will. But if both parents are what I tell my clients good enough, yes, then it's best to have them in the child's life, even if you have a slightly different household arrangement or menu of food items, right? Because if we're actually wanting to prioritize the child, that means making sure the other parent is involved in the child's life.
I'm so glad you mentioned it. One of the things I lean into heavily with my co-parenting clients is this notion of, but my ex is very toxic. They were toxic with me, and maybe we're not talking about even emotional or physical violence, certainly, but just difficult people. The word that's bandied about often is narcissism, right? Mm-hmm. And they say, how can I possibly let my child go to this household? And of course, there are two prongs to that. One is you don't have a choice most times, but also you can teach your child and they can learn from your role modeling how to deal with a difficult person, whether they're a narcissist, have some other behavior disorder, or just difficult in general. Mm-hmm. It's important that we give our children the space to learn from that experience. You're not teaching them that life is perfect, that everything you did was right, or that everything your co-parent does is wrong. But you're saying when they bring those things to you, and if you in fact are that safe person, they will say, wow, Dad was really hard on me today. I didn't know what to say. First thing I always tell people, validate the feeling. Don't try to solve it or correct it. Just validate. That must be hard for you. And then allow them to explain their experience. And at that point, decide whether you need professional help, like a therapist for the child, to process emotions and to figure out a path forward, or whether you can give them some tips and tools, right? Not my experience with Dad is this, and therefore you should do this, but have you been able to talk to Dad, or have you tried this? Because children obviously don't have all the tools you have. So yeah. I find when you allow the space for that safety and for sharing what happens in the co-parent's household, there's some real learning opportunities you have that the kids have, and they know they're safe parent, and they can and will come to you for that advice. And then you will know when you need professional intervention for them as well.
I love this topic because I have been a proponent of learning more about emotional intelligence. And I think this leads right into that, because if, we focus on our child's physical health, right? Making sure they're in sports, they're physically active, they're eating those broccoli and other vegetable items. We think about their education, right? So we think about making sure they get A's and B's in school, that they get tutoring if they need help. We think about their social health, right? Being exposed to other children, hopefully having good relationships with their siblings or other people in the family. But we tend to falter when we are trying to develop a child's emotional security and intelligence and health. And I say that because, and understandably, I get it. I have had children cry and it breaks my heart. Yes. I do get it. But there comes a point where you have to let the child cry. You have to let the child express emotions, but go one step further, learning how to express those emotions in a healthy fashion, identify those emotions, and I see it all the time, like with my nieces, when they fall and they start crying. Okay, did you cry because it hurt, or did you cry because it was scary? Right?
Yes.
Those are two very different realities. And it's not you as the adult to tell the child how to feel or what they are feeling in that moment, but rather getting feedback from the child on how they feel and how they identify with it.
And look, this is one of the most important jobs we have as a parent, as an aunt, right? Is helping children with their emotional intelligence, their emotional state. So these are all opportunities for learning. And obviously, these are learning opportunities for you as well as the child. So I never tell any parent they have to be perfect in these moments, right? But they can have another try. So, for example, if your child brings you an emotional situation, but it's not a good moment, tell them that must be hard for you. It's a great way to respond. I'll get back to you about that. Let's talk in a moment. Could you spend some downtime in your room and have a moment to yourself to help you self-regulate, right, before you go back to them? There are lots of delay mechanisms to build in your opportunity to be prepared. So I don't ever like a parent to think they have to deal, unless the kid's on fire and you're headed to the emergency room. There are often opportunities to allow them to be emotional, as you suggest, to reflect upon why it may have been. Are you embarrassed, scared, hurt? And talk about it later. And these are wonderful, maybe the most important opportunities we give our children, whether you're in an intact or divorced family. So I love that we're talking about emotional intelligence, because I think it's a great failing, right, in our world. And if we had more of it, I think a lot of the conflict we had would be de-escalated.
Yeah. Well, and there's something to be said. If we haven't worked with our own emotions, how can we then help others with their emotions? And I'm almost saying it from the child's perspective, right?
Yes.
Because if the child is scared, or the child is fearful, or the child is happy and excited, right? But it just comes across in an improper way, right? So we don't want a child being excited and like punching everyone, right? So,
exactly.
So it's, we as adults are there to help them learn the proper mechanisms so they can then regulate themselves. And then we as adults and parents need to also learn how to regulate, because it's very hard to help a child regulate if we haven't regulated ourselves.
And I think that really leads us right into a topic I know we wanted to discuss, Theresa, which is self-care, because emotional regulation, we started the podcast with us talking about how important it is to be regulated for your kids. It's so important so that they are not raised in a state of heightened conflict and escalation all the time. But how do we do that? How are we parenting and working and doing all the things that we need to do and taking care of ourselves? I don't put it in a I'll get to it when I get to a category. I put it into a mandatory category with my clients. So I recommend things like yoga and meditation. I love walks. Walks are great, right? They allow us to calm down, think about the overwhelm, let it go. It doesn't have to cost a lot or involve a lot of equipment. If I may, I have one self-regulation mechanism that's from a somatic healing technique that I love. And it's one that I think as a parent we can all use, because we get so many, I call them internal browser tabs open.
Yes.
I'm working, I'm taking care of the kids, I'm worried about dinner. And when that happens, we get so chaotic in our own minds that we might, snip at the children we don't intend to. We might get aggravated in public with someone else, and then our children see that, and that's their role modeling. So if you can take a moment, whether you're sitting in your car, not driving, but sitting in your car, sitting in your office, just sitting alone, to lift your arms, inhale, and literally let them go. I have to laugh about the sigh, because even my adult children are like, Mom, you're always making some weird noise. But I'm like, that's just my self-care. So I am not embarrassed. And I think none of us should be, right? Take a moment. What it allows you to do is reset. It's a resetting, right? So that you can bring yourself back right here. And another great exercise, Theresa, is to ground yourself. So whether you're putting those feet on the floor, I prefer bare feet, but that's not always possible, especially in my climate more than yours.
Yeah.
But put those feet on the ground, ground yourself by looking around your space and naming 3 things. It's a great therapeutic practice that really folds nicely into somatic healing, because it brings you back to this moment. We can get so caught up in the idea that our co-parent or someone else is doing something bad to us in our divorce or otherwise, that we're not really in reality anymore. And that chaos and overwhelm overtakes us. So by doing those 2 simple things, we can come back to this moment. And really, that's what mindfulness tells us. That's all we can manage. That's all we can do. So if we are here, we are not there, and we're not all over the place. And that helps us and it helps our kids.
Yeah. And I think taking the time to do that is a lot more beneficial than people may think. Because I've heard it. I've heard every excuse in the book that our litigation case is too busy. I am, transporting the kids to 5 different activities in school, and I get it. But these activities, like Cherie, the one you just did by raising your hands over your head and letting them go, I mean, you can do that in less than 30 seconds.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
that's all you need is just 10 to 30 seconds. And if you've reset yourself, at least for now, to get you to bedtime, for example, then do it. And everything else can wait for those 30 seconds.
That's exactly right. And you will find practices that work for you. There's lots of resources and lots of places now. And just pick a few that you have as your tips and tools. And you'll find that if you create a routine, they're already done. So if you get up in the morning and you do a couple of things before you have your coffee or tea, that helps, right? If you build it into your schedule, just like you build in feeding your children and feeding yourself, it's going to be more practical, more workable, and more successful in my experience.
So Cherie, I have a confession, and I'm okay for the listeners to know it. One of my guilty self-care practices is playing like really loud music. My mom has told me I will need hearing aids probably by the age of 65, and I'm okay with that. I have accepted it. Welcome to radical acceptance. And so that's one of the things I do too. And whether it's in my earbuds or in my car, I do apologize if you also hear the music. There's just something about music that calms me down. And it could be, orchestra, or it could be a rap song, right? Like it's something that I'm in the mood for. And for me, it takes one song and it tends to bring my anxiety down. And so to your point, it's unique for everyone.
It is. And find it, right? Lean into, I'm going to try this today. If it's not for me, I'm going to do something different tomorrow. But it doesn't, I guess, to your point, it doesn't have to be complicated, right? You found that works for you, and music's pretty accessible in those places. And mostly you can keep it to yourself. So that's great.
Yeah. Except for the people on the car next to me or who are sitting in silence.
I love knowing that about you. And I love knowing it's all kinds of music, but that's what makes us, rich in our humanity, and never feel ashamed that you need to take that space. We all do.
Yes. Agreed. So take your space, especially when you're taking care of yourself. Well, Cherie, I know time is wrapping up quickly and we could talk all day, but where can the listener find you if they've loved our conversation and would love to learn more about what you do?
The best place to find all things Cherie Morris is deardivorcecoach.com. There are loads of free resources, book suggestions, activities, ideas. How do I work with Cherie? What is divorce coaching? I want to do a deep dive. And there's also a professional group that I lead, which I'd love to just touch on briefly for any professionals who are listening. It's called the Divorce Leader Circle, and it was built for people like you and I who want to do a deeper dive with each other. And it's really simple to join. I will have a link on the website for those professionals, really therapists, attorneys, any professional in the divorce space as a coach wants to work in this space with us. Let's get together monthly and do a deeper dive into these topics we don't have time to talk about with each other very often.
I love that because not only are we here to support our clients, we're here to support each other.
Yes. And I have really enjoyed that with you, Theresa, getting to know you, learning your expertise, and knowing all the good things you're doing out there for your clients.
Well, thank you, Cherie. And thank you again for joining us here on the Legal Lounge.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our discussion. To learn more about me and the Modern Legal team, go to our website, modernlegalnc.com, or check out the links in our show notes to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You can also call us at 704-286-6302. If you have been intrigued by the conversation and would like us to continue our discussions, please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. See you next time.